The depth charges began at 0340. You've been at periscope depth for 6 hours, running silent. The crew moving in socks, because every sound travels in water, and the British destroyer above you has been patient in a way that tells you it knows exactly where you are. The hull is groaning. The pressure gauges are doing things pressure gauges shouldn't do. And 43 men are looking at you, not asking anything, not saying anything, just looking, the way men look at the one person in the room who is supposed to know what comes next. You don't know what comes next. This is your story. The boat is at 60 meters, and the depth charges are getting closer. You can tell by the sound, not the explosion itself, which you feel in your teeth and your sternum and the base of your spine, but the interval between the explosion and the shock wave reaching the hull, which has been shortening for the last 40 minutes, in a way that means whoever is up there is walking the pattern toward you with the methodical patience of someone who has done this before and knows that patience is the only thing that matters at this depth. Your hydrophone operator has his eyes closed and his headphones pressed to his ears with both hands, listening to something you can't hear, and every 30 seconds he gives you a small nod that means still tracking. Still coming, nothing has changed. 43 men. Most of them are older than 22 now, but not by much. Your first watch officer, Brandt, is standing beside the periscope housing, with his arms folded and his face doing the thing it does under pressure, completely neutral. The blankness of a man who has decided that his face is not permitted to show what his mind is doing. You've known Brandt for 2 years. You know what that blankness costs him. You became a submarine commander because you were good at mathematics, good at spatial reasoning, good at holding multiple variables in your mind simultaneously and finding the one path through them that leads somewhere useful. The mathematics right now are not favorable. You have one electric motor running at minimal power, enough air for approximately 4 more hours at this depth, and a destroyer above you that has been dropping charges every 12 minutes since 0340, with no indication of losing patience or fuel. You also have a crack in the forward ballast tank seal that your chief engineer found at 0600 and reported to you in a voice so carefully controlled it told you more than the words did. The crack is not critical yet. The word yet is doing a great deal of work in that sentence. The next depth charge hits close enough that the lights go out for 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the darkness is absolute 60 meters of Atlantic Ocean above you, a steel hull between you and it that is 31 meters long and 6 meters wide, and 43 men breathing in that darkness without making a sound because they understand, without being told, that sound travels in water and the thing above them is listening. When the lights come back, you look at the depth gauge, 64 meters. The charge pushed you down 4 meters. You correct for it. You don't look at the faces around you because you don't need to. You can feel them, the way you can feel the pressure change in the boat before the gauges register it. A kind of physical awareness that 2 years of command has given you, whether you wanted it or not. The hydrophone operator opens his eyes, takes off one headphone, looks at you. Turning, he says, northeast. You let out a breath you've been holding since 0340. Not over, but the mathematics have changed. You grew up 3 streets from the Elbe. This matters because the Elbe meant ships, and ships meant everything when you were 8 years old, and the harbor was the largest thing in the world, and the men who worked on the water had a quality that the men who worked on land didn't have, something in how they moved, how they looked at the horizon, how they understood that the world was larger than Hamburg, and that Hamburg was large enough. Your father was a harbor pilot, which meant he spent his working life guiding other men's ships through the approaches he knew better than anyone, standing on the bridge of vessels that weren't his, and navigating them through the channels he'd memorized, the way other men memorized streets. He came home every evening, smelling of salt water and diesel, and the specific combination of those two things became, for you, the smell of competence. You were not a difficult child. You were a quiet one, which is different, the quietness of someone who is paying attention, rather than the quietness of someone who has nothing to say. You watched things. You noticed how the tide changed the harbor's geometry twice a day, how the same channel that was navigable at high tide became a different problem at low, how the river itself was never the same river twice, even though it looked the same. Your father noticed you noticing. He started bringing you to the harbor on Sunday mornings when you were 10, not to teach you anything in particular, just to watch the water together, in the way that people who understand water watch it, not for what it's doing, but for what it's about to do. At 16, you told him you wanted to join the Kriegsmarine. He looked at you for a long moment, with an expression you couldn't read then, and can read clearly now, the expression of a man who has spent his life on the water and understands exactly what that life costs. Looking at his son who is about to find out, he didn't try to dissuade you. He took you to the harbor instead, to a particular spot on the eastern quay, where you could see 3 different classes of vessels simultaneously, and he said, "Water doesn't care about rank or intention. It only cares about whether you understand it." Then he went home and left you there, which was his way of saying everything he needed to say. Officer training at the Naval Academy in Flensburg was rigorous in a way that suited you, the emphasis on precision, on calculation, on the understanding that the margin between correct and incorrect at sea was measured not in degrees of error, but in lives. You were good. Not exceptional at first, not the natural talent that some of your classmates clearly were, but steady and methodical, in a way that your instructors noted and that proved, over time, to be worth more than talent. Talent is what you start with. Steadiness is what keeps 43 men alive at 60 meters. Submarine school came in 1939, which, in retrospect, was the precise worst time to fall in love with the undersea boot, but also the precise best time to understand what it was for. The boats were extraordinary, everything reduced to its essential function, no space wasted, no movement that didn't mean something. The entire vessel, a single integrated system in which every component existed in relationship to every other. You understood them the way you'd understood the harbor as a child, not by being told, but by watching, by feeling, by learning to read the signals that came through the hull itself when you knew how to listen. Your first patrol was in the North Atlantic, in the winter of 1940. You came back. The winter of 1940 was the kind of winter that taught you everything the Academy hadn't, which was most of what there was to know. They called 1941 the happy time, which tells you something about who was doing the naming. For the U-boot arm, it was the period of maximum effectiveness, the convoy routes not yet adequately defended, the Allied anti-submarine technology not yet what it would become, the mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic temporarily favoring the boats. You made 4 patrols in 1941 and came back from all 4, which was not guaranteed and which you understood was not guaranteed each time you left. Lorient with the crew assembled on the deck, and the band playing, and the officers of the flotilla watching from the quay with the specific expression, of men sending other men somewhere they themselves were not going. Your first confirmed sinking was in March 1941, a British merchant vessel of approximately 8,000 tons, carrying war material from Halifax to Liverpool. You tracked her for 6 hours, waited for the right geometry of sea and darkness and angle, and gave the order. The torpedoes ran true. The ship went down in 11 minutes. You watched through the periscope until the last of her disappeared, and then you took the boat down and ran northeast and said nothing for a long time, because there was nothing to say that wasn't already understood. 43 men on that ship. You calculated this afterward from the vessel's registry. You wrote the number in your patrol log in the column marked Remarks, and then crossed it out because it wasn't a remark, it was something else entirely, and the patrol log wasn't the right place for it. Brandt asked you once, in the officers' mess in Lorient between patrols, over a bottle of French wine that neither of you was quite tasting, whether you thought about the men on the ships. You said yes. He said, so do I. That was the entirety of the conversation, and also, in some ways, the most honest conversation you had in the entire war. Your reputation built steadily through 1,941, not the reputation of the aces, the men whose tonnage numbers were reported in the newspapers and who received their Knight's Crosses on the quay at Lorient, with photographers present, but the quieter reputation of a commander who brought his boat back, who made good decisions under pressure, who had a gift for finding the gap in a convoy's escort screen that wasn't a gap until he made it one. Flotilla Command noticed. You were given command of U-96 inches October 1941, a 7C, the workhorse of the fleet, not glamorous, but proven, and the boat that would define the next 2 years of your life, in ways you couldn't yet calculate. The crew of U-96 had made 3 patrols under the previous commander. They had their own systems, their own rhythms, their own understanding of the boat that had accumulated over months of shared danger. You spent the first 2 weeks in port simply learning them how they moved, how they communicated, what they did when they were afraid, which was always and never and everything in between. Brandt came with you as first watch officer, which was the one continuity you'd asked for and received. By December 1941, the mathematics had begun to change. The Americans were in the war. The convoy escorts were getting better. The gap that had existed in 1940 and 1941 between U-boot capability and Allied countermeasures was narrowing in a direction that everyone in the flotilla understood and no one discussed, because discussing it would have required acknowledging something that the language available to you in Lorient in December 1941 didn't quite have the right words for yet. You made your 5th patrol in January 1942. You came back. You noted, in the remarks column of the patrol log, that the mathematics were changing. By 1942, the Atlantic had become a different ocean. Not literally. The water was the same gray-green cold it had always been. The convoys still ran on the same routes. The weather still came from the same directions, with the same indifference to what was happening on and under the surface. But the mathematics had shifted in a way that was visible in the patrol reports, and in the faces of the commanders who came back from the North Atlantic, and in the faces of the ones who didn't come back at all, which, by the autumn of 1942, was becoming a category with too many members. The Allied aircraft were the first thing. You'd operated in 1941 with the reasonable expectation that the air gap, the Central Atlantic zone beyond the range of land-based aircraft, would remain a zone of relative safety, where the boat could operate on the surface at night and recharge and move at speed without the constant threat of something coming out of the sky. The air gap closed in 1,942 inches stages, each stage announced not by any communication from Flotilla Command, but by the disappearance of boats that had gone out and not come back. The silence on the radio frequencies that had previously carried their reports. You tracked these silences the way you tracked convoy positions, as information, as data, as something that changed the calculation. The radar was the second thing. You understood it was coming before you encountered it. The intelligence reports had been clear enough, but understanding it abstractly and experiencing it in the North Atlantic at 3 in the morning, when a destroyer appeared. Out of darkness, at a range that should have given you time to dive, and didn't, were two different kinds of knowledge. You dove in time on that occasion. The man on the bridge behind you, a 20-year-old petty officer named Fisher, who'd been with you since U-96's first patrol under your command, did not make it to the hatch before the destroyer's gun found the bridge. You were at the periscope when Fisher died. You did not have time to do anything except continue the dive and note, in the part of your mind that kept running the mathematics, regardless of what else was happening, that the margin had just become thinner. Fisher was from Kiel. He had a sister there who sent him books, actual books, paperbacks with worn covers that circulated through the crew until they fell apart. After his death, you found the current one, a detective novel, half read on his bunk, a folded piece of paper marking his page. You left the paper where it was. You don't know why. It seemed wrong to move it. The patrols in 1942 and into 1943 were longer and harder and produced less than the patrols of 1941, which the mathematics could have predicted, and which you had in fact predicted, and which, knowing in advance, did nothing to change the experience of. The crew felt it not in any visible deterioration, not in any failure of discipline or professionalism, but in a quality of silence that was different from the silence of 1941, heavier and more specific. The silence of men who have updated their understanding of the odds and are living inside that update every day without discussing it. Brandt said to you once, in February 1943, on the surface at night, in the Bay of Biscay, running for Lorient, after a patrol that had cost you 2 men and produced nothing, Brandt said, "Do you think they know?" Meaning the crews, meaning the boats that were being lost, meaning the broader mathematics of what was happening to the U-boot arm in the North Atlantic. You said yes. He said, so do I. It was the same conversation you'd had in Lorient in 1941 about the men on the ships, and it meant the same thing, and you both understood it, and neither of you said anything else. You arrived in Lorient in March 1943. The flotilla had lost 7 boats in the previous 2 months. The band still played on the quay. The officers still watched from the pier. The wine in the mess was still French, and still good, and still not quite tasted. Everything was the same, and nothing was the same, and the gap between those two things was where the war now lived. You requested your next patrol assignment the same day you arrived. Not because you wanted to go, you were 31 years old and tired in a way that sleep didn't reach, but because waiting had become worse than going, which was a calculation you recognized as irrational and made anyway. The assignment came through in April. Bay of Biscay, outbound transit, the most dangerous water in the Atlantic, in the spring of 1943, which everyone knew and no one said. You told Brandt. He nodded once. You both went back to your drinks. The Bay of Biscay in April 1943 was not a place you crossed. It was a place you survived or didn't. The Allied air patrols had turned it into something that had no precedent in the war's earlier years, a 400-mile transit zone, where the probability of air contact on any given crossing had reached a level that Flotilla Command was no longer putting in writing, which told you more than the numbers would have. You knew this going in. The crew knew it going in. You left Lorient on the 14th of April with 43 men and the particular quality of silence that had become U-96's atmosphere by that point in the war. Not fear exactly, not resignation exactly, but something in between that had its own weight and its own texture, and that you'd stop trying to name because naming it didn't change it. The first air contact came on the second day out at 1,140, a Sunderland flying boat dropping out of low cloud cover at a range that gave you 40 seconds to dive. You dove. The bombs fell close enough to crack 2 gauges in the control room and start a small fire in the electrical panel that your chief engineer had under control in 4 minutes, which was 4 minutes of a specific kind of time that you don't forget. The boat held. You went to 60 meters and ran silent for 6 hours, and came up at dusk to find the ocean empty in every direction, and the air cold and the crew quiet, in the way they were always quiet, after something like that, not relieved, not celebrating, just present, just still there. The second contact came on the 4th day. Another aircraft, different type, the identification academic, because what mattered was the same, regardless of type. The sudden appearance out of cloud cover, the dive, the bombs, the gauges, the darkness, and the pressure, and the count of men who were still with you when the lights came back on. All 43. You noted this in the log. It seemed important to note. On the 5th day, Brandt found you in the forward torpedo room at 0300, sitting on a crate with the patrol log open on your knees. Not writing in it, just sitting with it. He sat down across from you without saying anything. You sat together for perhaps 20 minutes in the sound of the hull and the water and the machinery, and then he said, "Do you remember Hamburg?" You said yes. He said, "What part?" You said, "The harbor on Sunday mornings." He said, "Me too," though it wasn't his harbor, it was yours. He'd never been to Hamburg until the war, but you understood what he meant, which was that he was thinking about a place that still existed somewhere above and beyond the Atlantic Ocean, a place that had Sunday mornings and harbor water and the smell of salt and diesel, a place that was worth the mathematics of getting back to. You didn't get back. The contact on the 6th day came at first light, before the watch had fully changed. 2 aircraft simultaneously, from different bearings, a coordinated attack pattern that the Allies had developed specifically for the Bay of Biscay transit, and that left no angle from which to dive without presenting a target to one or the other. You made the call to fight on the surface, which was the call the tactical situation required, and which you knew as you made it was probably the last tactical call you would make. The crew went to the anti-aircraft guns without being ordered to, which told you everything about who they were and what 2 years together had built. And they fought with the precise, disciplined efficiency of men who had decided that if this was how it ended, it would at least end on their terms. It ended quickly. The water was very cold. You think about Brandt sometimes, in the way you think about things in the moment before they stop. You think about Fisher's half-read detective novel with the folded paper marking his page. You think about your father on the eastern quay of Hamburg harbor, leaving you there alone with the water and saying everything he needed to say in the act of leaving. You think about the 43 men on the first ship you sank in March 1941, whose number you wrote in the remarks column and then crossed out because the remarks column wasn't the right place. There is no right place for that number. There never was. The water is very cold. and very dark, and very patient, which is what water always is, which is what your father understood, and what you understood watching him, and what U-96 taught you again, at 60 meters, in ways that went deeper than understanding. 31 years, 11 patrols, 104,000 tons of Allied shipping, 43 men who trusted the mathematics you ran and the calls you made. 3 years of the most demanding work you ever did, done as well as it could be done in water that didn't care about rank or intention. And Fisher's novel, still open to the same page. This was your life, every fathom of it,